If you, like me, live a life filled with rose-colored glasses that are nostalgia-based, you may sometimes pick up your Nintendo controller or mosey on down into the Switch store to play old-school games. This process can be incredibly fun and allow you to dive deep into your misspent youth. And then, after about 5 minutes, when the nostalgia rush wears off, you play a real game. Some games, Mario is Missing, Where's Waldo, or Super Pitfall come to mind. Well, they don't work. The control scheme is awkward, you're not sure what the hell you're doing, you've absolutely seen that background before, all the usual stuff. And that's okay, by the way. Not every game has to hold up. But some games, and I mean games well beyond the usual classics, are just special. They are games you can pick up now, 30 or 40 years later, and still feel like something you download off of Steam or play on your own. These games hold a special place in the hearts of gamers, and in today's video, I want to talk about 7 Nintendo and Super Nintendo games that hold up stunningly well today. Now, that being said, I've got to explain something super important. What exactly do I mean when I say a game that holds up well today? Because that's kind of broad, right? A game that one person still enjoys may be based in nostalgia or memories, not an actual gaming experience. So, by games that hold up well, I'm specifically referring to games that a person could pick up who didn't know any better, start playing them, and think that the game had just been designed. Obviously, advances in technology, even in the indie pixelated game style that has become so popular, have made that a tougher thing to imagine. But I think there are some games that really adhere to basic gaming principles that we can still enjoy. I also think that this exists across genres. To that end, I don't mean for this to be a comprehensive list, that should go without saying. Rather, I want to use this list to talk about different games in different genres and why they still work well today. And we're going to start with an absolute classic franchise that I've reviewed before on this channel, Contra. Contra is an exceptional run-and-gun game that started as an arcade classic in 1987 before moving over to the Nintendo in 1988. The game's plot, such as it is, features two Rambo/G.I. Joe lookalikes who are fighting their way through an evil enemy organization and must ultimately destroy the aliens within Galaga. While the game wasn't an all-time bestseller, it did make enough of a mark to spawn multiple sequels on numerous platforms. The most recent game, Contra 4, is a remake of the original and appeared in 2024. So, why am I saying that this game holds up today? What about Contra still works? First, despite the fact that it came out in 1988, it employs a few techniques that I think you still see in games today. First and foremost, this includes the level progression system, which engages in multiple changes in perspectives. You've got a variety of different level designs, something that you really didn't see at the time. This includes side-scrollers, levels where you move up, and the arcade-like stages that are basically 3D boxes. The weapon choices also give you plenty of ways to play. Machine gun and spread were the perennial favorite of most players, but people with different styles or who wanted different challenges could use the spiral weapon. I actually like the laser gun, kind of like a lightsaber. I'd also add that different stages offered different challenges, some of which were more fair than others. One of the vertical stages offered boulders that would crush you at random, kind of unfair, but the side-scrolling stages offered multiple pathways and cover-based elements, something that, again, was relatively advanced. Reviews at the time praised the game's action, noting that it was relatively non-stop and kept players on their toes. It also offered two-player simultaneous play in an era that tended to default more towards turn-based multiplayer games. Indeed, you can see the influence of Contra in other run-and-gun games like Iron Meat and Blazing Chrome. I'd actually go one step further and argue that Cuphead, potentially the best run-and-gun game over the past decade, draws extensively from Contra, including in its weapon selection, multiple playstyles, and a firm need to throw your controller through the wall when playing. Next, a classic puzzle game, The Adventures of Lolo. In this game, you play as Lolo, this adorable little blue ball who has to march his way through level after level, solving puzzles in order to rescue his love, Princess Lala. The durability of this game comes down to the way it engages in some basic gaming principles that weren't always found in non-Miyamoto Nintendo games. Chief among them is that the game works for any player, even if they didn't like puzzle games. Stage 1 starts simple enough, you collect the hearts, yeet the snake, move on. In Stage 2, you realize that you've got to get the hearts in the right order, lest you get hit by this pink guy. By Stage 3, you learn even more about positioning, as you can accidentally freeze this green sleeper in a location that will make progress impossible and force you to use the select button to restart the level. The entire game progresses like that, teaching you new concepts and then forcing you to deploy them in more advanced ways. It does a great job of testing your logic skills, pathfinding, and creativity, often while forcing you to really stretch your reflexes. Yes, the game is a puzzle game, but it's one that forces you to be quick and always keeps you on your toes. Today's best puzzle games do that. They don't just test your brain speed, they also check the speed of your fingers. More to the point, unlike other Nintendo puzzle games, this one wasn't completely impossible or utterly unforgiving. There was no save button, but a password system did allow you to restart from wherever you left off. Also, look at Lolo, he's so cute. Platformers such as Shovel Knight, The Messenger, or Celeste, a personal favorite of mine, have always been a staple of video games. It goes without saying that some games, like Super Mario or Mega Man, remain incredible, immutable, and unbeatable classics. I want to take this in a different direction and talk about Castlevania, and I mean the original Castlevania. This is one of the oldest games on this list, going back to 1986 when it was first released by Konami. There are a few things that manage to hold this version of Castlevania apart from other platformers. Indeed, even other classics. First, the game contains many elements that you still see in platformers today, but were pretty innovative at the time. This includes the Vampire Killer, otherwise known as the Whip, the ability to collect backup items, and the life meter. Okay, the life meter wasn't all that innovative, but when combined with a series of elements, including time levels, multi-directional stages, complex bosses, and a New Game Plus mode, a term that hadn't even been invented yet, now you're talking something different. The game also has a degree of complexity that you didn't usually see in platformers at the time. Think of Mario. It doesn't really make you think. Castlevania does. You can only hold one backup weapon at a time, so which is it going to be? Well, that depends on the enemies you face and your playstyle. The world is massive, something that was noted in many reviews, with the ability to hold your attention for some time. Since this was designed as a Nintendo game, not an arcade game, the difficulty level was actually reasonable. Yes, it was hard, but the game wasn't just meant to suck up your quarters. You actually had a chance to win. Furthermore, considering the time period, the game is atmospheric. It's, okay, kind of over the top, but it also feels kind of creepy. And the score is clearly meant to invoke feelings of dark terror that can only be stirred up by vampires. This, combined with a downright creepy color palette, allows the Nintendo to milk its then primitive system for everything it was worth, and it created a better product for players. Clearly, Nintendo saw the power of the franchise. I couldn't find any details on units sold, but the game has made it onto numerous best ever lists. A sequel followed in 1987, and more than 24 games have been part of this series. This next one is more random, but as far as simple sports games go, it is a joy to play. Let's talk Baseball Simulator 1000. Anyone remember that one? Sports games were hard for early Nintendo, mainly because most games were not able to get the rights to use real players or teams. As a result, you either had players with goofy names or some hilariously bad translations. Anyway, all of this left Nintendo in a bind. While later games would use team names and players, developers that didn't want to engage in the enormous expense had to figure out alternative ways. Ladies and gentlemen, Baseball Simulator 1000, a game that remains stupidly, deeply entertaining. This 1989 product, produced by Culture Brain, offered a lot of features that better sports games were expected to have. This included different teams, alternative stadiums, exhibition or full season mode, and more. All of that was great. But what really set Baseball Simulator apart, and why I think it deserved to be remembered, was its Ultra mode. Not satisfied with the idea of just allowing people to play regular baseball that adhered to things like the laws of gravity and physics, Baseball Simulator 1000 allowed you to use Ultra teams. These teams had players that could use special powers, like a missile hit, a ball that had diamonds that would incapacitate anyone near it, smoke screens, zigzag hits, you name it. It was really fun, and a unique approach to baseball. To be clear, your powers were not unlimited. You basically had mana points that would, with time, run out, leaving you stuck to obey the ordinary rules of regular order. As such, you had to think, was this situation important enough that it required the use of your missile hit, or should you just try to bunt? Pitchers, too, had special powers. You could throw a ball at 1,000,000,000 miles an hour, making it virtually unhittable. You could also throw 3 balls at once, engage in a stop and go. It was just a creative blast. Want to play an Ultra on Ultra game? Go for it. Want to feel better about yourself and play Ultra versus regular team? That's an option too. However, the game also had more than just the Ultra function. You could move players in the field to any position, meaning you could actually engage in early versions of the shift. Some players were faster than others, some better hitters, and when you got to know who was good at what, you could really start to use some advanced strategies. Also, if I'm remembering correctly, you could hit the opposing pitcher with an iron ball, and that took him out of the game. Awesome. Let's move on to RPGs. When done right, role-playing games could be deeply creative, invent innovative systems of combat, and ensure that players are invested in an incredible story that does more than entertain. It makes them think, or makes them feel, or maybe even makes them laugh. Earthbound meets all of these markers and more. The game, known as Mother 2 in Japan, took 5 years to develop, meaning the developers would have plenty of time to invent a variety of new systems that players still enjoy today. On the one hand, the plot sounds like something relatively run out of the mill. Ness, Paula, Jeff, and Pooh must travel the world, collect melodies, and defeat Gigas. That being said, even that opening sentence probably shows off a simple truth. The game was very different, and these differences, and the innovations they brought, made this game special. First, it's one of the few RPGs that takes place in our world, or at least something close to it, that, in and of itself, made it different than the average. The world is basically ours. There are human shops, human items, other humans. The hit points were in the dozens and hundreds, not the hundreds and thousands. And the game takes place in America. Well, okay, excuse me, Eagle Land, but you know what I mean. We're talking about the Super Nintendo, so obviously the graphics are going to be better, but I do think it's worth noting just how good they really are. The game takes a different route than most RPGs, abandoning its top-down perspective for object projection, allowing layers to be incorporated into the display of the game. Random encounters, the bane of the existence for most RPG players, gone. In its place were battles that you could see and prepare for. I'd argue that this feature is a function of the game designer's creator, Shigesato Itoi, to intentionally appeal to more than just traditional gamers. Honestly, the game is goofy and weird, and there are almost countless examples of this creativity. In one area, you find that a kid just, quote, did his business, and if you search by the palm tree, you get, quote, Pokey's stink still hangs in the air. In another area, characters are too shy to talk to you, and you have to get the book Overcoming Shyness to get them to open up. The game often uses puns and humor to make its point, and to make you laugh. And then, out of nowhere, it'll drop these weird subversive lines like, questioning the very nature of capitalism. All right. Even this barely scratches the surface of the content of the game. There is rare and difficult dialogue that you can access only through a series of set movements or inputs, giving the game a degree of replayability that isn't found in every RPG. The soundtrack doesn't just stick to one genre, instead shifting between a variety of influences, including salsa and reggae. All of these changes made Earthbound more accessible and comprehensive than the average RPG. It was something so different and adult-sounding, despite its hilarious kid-friendly appearance, that you never knew what you were playing in the game and what you were going to get every time you sat down. This helps explain why the game was so highly regarded by critics and sold so well in Japan, although it didn't sell that well in America. That might be, in part, due to its strange marketing campaign. This game stinks. That might be a story for another video. Finally, you can see the influence of the game today. Quite a few RPGs take the Earthbound art style and run with it, and many use its twisted sense of humor. Of course, the biggest influence, and perhaps the most impactful, might be Undertale, one of the best-selling RPGs ever. Creator Toby Fox has been explicit about discussing the link between Earthbound and Undertale. The visual style, quirky sense of humor, and deeply disturbing twists of both games all show how they are directly related. Indeed, in many ways, you can argue that Earthbound is the Undertale of the 90s. I think it would be wrong of me to do a list of games that hold up well if you don't discuss the game that helped create a genre, Super Metroid, one of the all-time greats. Super Metroid builds exceptionally well on the success of the original game, although the plot takes place after the events of the lesser-known Game Boy game, Metroid 2: Return of Samus. In Super Metroid, Samus follows after space pirate Ridley, who has stolen a Metroid larva. Finding him on the planet Zebes, Samus must battle her way around the planet, defeating Ridley, other bosses, and eventually Mother Brain. What makes this game so special is the way that it builds on previous games, while also turning it into something new and special. The environment is rich and detailed, with excellent graphics that would fit in well with many of today's pixel-style games. The game truly captured the spirit of Metroidvania games, allowing you to explore in any order you want, while also testing on your ability to find new in-game abilities to advance. New innovations stud the game. There's a map, a heads-up display, a slew of weapons, and more. The game's environment is rich and highly detailed, with new worlds within the planet, including water sections, elevators, lava, and more. You had new jumps, new abilities, and a ton of new power-ups to play with. Also, the bosses. There's this guy. And this thing. That's creepy as hell. The music takes full advantage of all 8 channels that the Super Nintendo was capable of playing. As a result, you had a collection of sound effects that added to the atmosphere, and the music that could get, well, downright creepy. Honestly, some of the sound effects in this game remind me of Animal Well. Maybe I'm nuts. What makes this game hold up so well is its massive sense of creativity, exploration, and open world adventure. When you get right down to it, if you're just picking up this game for the first time, you'll probably find that it's very similar to other games that are still popular today, such as Hollow Knight or Ori and the Blind Forest. These games incorporate the creation of deeply atmospheric settings, creating disturbing worlds that are matched by perfectly crafted graphics. They're also fronted by the creation of a main character who is much more than a generic guy with a gun. The game was a hit. It sold 1.42 million copies and became the 34th best-selling game in Super Nintendo history. It further cemented the status of Metroid as one of the better-known franchises, while also introducing new depths to the character of Samus. However, a series of unfortunate events, including the death of producer and designer Gunpei Yokoi, meant that the game did not receive the immediate sequel that its critical and commercial success would indicate it otherwise deserved. Metroid lay dormant for another 8 years. Last, a side-scrolling shooter game, one that was deeply challenging, utterly innovative, and completely addictive. Gradius III. In Gradius, you pilot the Vic Viper starship. The plot, yes, there's a plot, is that the invading dark forces, led by Bacterian, the god of destruction, did not know that was a thing, is launching an invasion against the planet of Gradius. You, the hero, are fighting for the United Gradius World Forces in an effort to defeat the dark forces. The game features 10 levels that, like all of the best games, are deeply challenging and build on each other. The first level starts you slow, before new levels introduce new challenges, including accelerating auto-scrolls and bosses that required lightning-fast reflexes. Speaking of bosses, honestly, they were cool as hell. They were creative and required different approaches both in terms of gameplay and how you built your ship. I'd actually argue that the best part of the game was that it required a level of customization you didn't usually see in games at the time. Different loadouts gave you different options about how you wanted to construct the power-ups and weapons for your ship. You could choose from a type select, which offered concrete loadouts, or an edit mode, which gave you more customization. But there was a trade-off, as some of the more powerful weapons, I'm looking at you, Spread Bomb, could only be found in type selects. The type that you selected would have massive impacts on how you played, approached bad guys, and ultimately if you won. And again, they were cool. I remember loving the options and how your selection of power-ups added an element of strategy to a genre that usually came without strategic thinking. What makes the game even more impactful is its age. This is an arcade port, but it was released for the Super Famicom in 1990 and the Super Nintendo in 91. Despite this, it was able to incorporate numerous advanced graphics, including an incredible use of the Super Nintendo's broad color palette that was molded into a series of difficult and fun obstacles. Remember the bubble level that, didn't really load that well? Or the auto scroll that required like 20 speed ups to manage? If this game had any flaws, it's that it was too tough. Indeed, the arcade version was so difficult that it was actually pulled from arcades by Konami, although some changes were made to the game that reduced its difficulty and created a continuation feature. However, the game still came with features that, quite frankly, made it fun. Its innovative elements, including customization and power-ups, still influence games today. I am, of course, well aware that any effort to make a definitive top 7 best games list is subject to opinion and much trolling. It goes without saying that I miss more games than I care to think about, so rather than use the comments to yell at me about what I missed, I ask you, what you think of the logic here? Any games that may have been a better selection for the genres I recommended? If yes, do let us know in the comments below. Of course, even more important is that I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like or subscribe, and do click on the next video that the almighty YouTube algorithm has selected for you. As always, have a wonderful day out there, my friends, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I like making it. Take care, everybody.